Hello, I have with me Mohamed Hassan Dable, Mohamed Noor, also known as Mohamed Noor. Mohamed, you're a political analyst and you're established in Somalian politics. You've advised a few times on BBC and on different platforms. So I wanted to establish first recent certain information about Somalia, so in the future we can ask more and learn more about Somalian politics from you. So I'll start with my first question, if that's okay with you. Can you please provide a summary of Somalia's coming into the civil war, and what was the main causes of it?
Rabi Abdul Samad, thank you for having me on this wonderful show, Everyday Politics. A very good question you've asked. Somalia, as you know, was a strong, viable state that was a key player in the African region before obviously the civil war. It had a very strong army. Its economy was, in the same league as other African countries, not the worst, but average for African standards. But then, in the last 20 years of the military rule, people normally say that the first 10 years were, when Somalia had its, kind of like best. Having said that, yes, it was dictatorship, but then it was a military rule for 20 years. But the first 10 years, many observers, many political analysts, many insiders or outsiders all converged that Somalia had, better days then. It was a de facto strong military state, where both then during the Cold War, the NATO and the West were all kind of like having good friendship with, except when the diplomatic ties with Soviet were cut because of its support for Ethiopia during the Ogaden War of 1977-78. So after this, the Ogaden War, 1977, this is when Somalia and Ethiopia had clash over Ogaden, which is the region of Somali, people who were actually ended up in Ethiopian territory after the colonial rule, during the scramble for Africa in 1884 in Berlin. That part has fallen onto the Ethiopian territory. And there's another part which has fallen into the British, and which was known as British Somaliland, Italian Somaliland, and French Somaliland, and NFD, which was part of Kenya. This was actually Somalia being divided by the different colonial powers. However, Somalia claimed that it had that land has to be, that territory belonged to Somalia, and it had to be liberated from Ethiopian occupation or Ethiopian colony. So that has actually caused the major, when Somalia began to decline was after 1977. Coming out of that war, Somalia came out as a loser in that war. Then that has actually affected the internal politics in Somalia. It's where, again, rebels started grouping to kind of like overthrow the government of Mohamed Siad Barre, late Mohamed Siad Barre. In 1978, there was the SSDF, which was southeast Somalia, I think northeast Somalia, and today called Puntland, it's a region. And then the military power began to crush them and subdue them using full military might. And then 10 years later, in 1988, we had SNM, Somali National Movement, which hailed from Hargeisa, which is the northern Somalia, today known as Somaliland. And if I give you a kind of like a brief background of these names, Somaliland and Somalia, you know, like in 1960, Somaliland gained in both the southern and east and the northern Somalia. So northern Somalia was under the British colony, and southern Somalia was under Italian, you know, rule, under Italian colony. So in 1960, 4 days, you know, before the South gained independence, the North gained independence. So the North, which was known as British Somaliland, they waited till the South got its independence 4 days later than them, and they waited to make sure that they are united with their southern brothers, and Somalia was born out of that union. So that's how Somalia came into existence. Now, then in 1988, Somaliland, they set up, you know, formerly known as Somaliland, you know, the tribes who were based in a major dominant tribe that was based in Hargeisa, Somaliland, set up a movement, which was a rebel group. The main aim was to have a go against the military rule. Their predecessors, the SSDF, were crushed, and then in 1988, then the SNM came into existence and started a military campaign to kind of like liberate themselves from Mogadishu. And the aim was to kind of like claim independence and become an independent entity, an independent state. Now, Somalia, then like in the 1989, USC was formed, and also SPM was formed. So USC, this is United Somali Congress. Supporters were coming from central Somalia and some parts of southern Somalia. And then there was the SPM, the Somali Patriotic Movement, which also was coming from southern Somalia. So these were the major military opposition rebel groups who waged war against the military rule. And then in 1991, the regime was kind of like very weak and could not resist any longer. And on 26th of January 1991, the rebels took over the control of Mogadishu, and the president was actually deposed. And at that point, since there was no transition in place, since the military groups were all fragmented, and each of them was having not like a vision which was out there to kind of like preserve the existing institutions, what happened was that the rebel group that took control of Mogadishu immediately began to clear all they called whoever was part of that establishment as remnants of Barre regime. So you see, it's actually a bad strategy. It's like what America did in Iraq when they occupied Iraq. What they first did was to kind of like disband the military that was there. And from that point, it kind of like things went out of control. Similarly, in Somalia, things went out of control, and the parties, the military groups themselves had to fight against each other, and people had to decentralize the chaos into the regions as well. And even within the regions, there were intra-clan fighting. So it was like, and that's how the civil war actually was kind of like spread around the country, and it was intensified.
So I understand now Somalia has a federal system. Has Somalia been able to break off away from anarchical movements and anarchy in general, and has they now kind of fully reunited into becoming a state that's committing to be a developing state?
Somalia has been a failed state for a very long time. In the meantime, it is a fragile state. You know, after the civil war and after, a lot of transitional governments, in 2012, the Somali government that was elected was a recognized government by the international community. So it has actually departed from transition, although the constitution that is governing the country at the moment, at the present, is a federal constitution, which itself is still in transition. It's a transitional federal system. So it's actually kind of like it is at odds with each other. The constitution is still not finalized. There's a lot of areas that need to be reviewed and finalized, put to a referendum and approved by the Somali citizens. But in the meantime, it is still lacking a lot of legitimacy, a lot of recognition from all parts, from all the quarters of the Somali people. Therefore, this is actually challenging a serious constitutional, it's a challenge, it's a serious constitutional challenge where the government of the day, headed by President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, who has been elected as a federal, head of state, is trying to break away from that federalism and work as someone who has got a central, unitary state in place, which is actually frustrating him more and also leading Somalia to go back into anarchy if it is not actually managed very well. So the institutions are recovering. There is some progress that are made, but the danger is the kind of moves and policies the current regime is pursuing are highly risky, and they could actually force Somalia back to slide again into chaos if not controlled very well.
Okay. I have another question for you regarding the unity. You said now it's kind of becoming a fragile state, which in order it makes it likely to develop into a centralized state because of its federal system, and now it kind of has to build a constitution and get out of its current system. What would your advice be to how to go on with the process of building the government properly? So what would be the next stepping blocks for building a successful Somalia?
Thank you very much. A very good question again. And the way forward for Somalia is building trust, building trust again. People, when civil war, like Lebanon, when people are out of civil war, their trust has been actually zero. To build that trust actually takes a long time, and it requires leadership that is very sensitive to what people have been through. And the way to do it is to pursue peace and reconciliation method that will bring all stakeholders, all groups together, will get them to negotiate on what form of Somalia after the civil war that we want to have. We know that Somalia failed when it was a strong central system. It has failed. Are we going to go back to, something we have already been seeing and done? I think the best way to build trust and to devolve powers to the regions is to pursue the federal system, to be sincere about it, and to go about it in an open and transparent way, and by negotiating and by getting an inclusive political representation from all quarters. So if that is actually implemented, then there will be hope for Somalia to move forward to a development stage. At the moment, we are actually moving one step forward, but also moving 2 steps backward. This is why my advice for the current leadership is, although we know that there's a looming election, which is already contested, it is timings and modalities and all of that still being debated, and there's no conclusion on which method of electoral system that will be opted for, and the timing of when the election is to take place. There is conflict over these issues, but I am sure if people, political players, all the stakeholders sit down together, and I think the international community and Somali partners kind of like act as facilitators, because I am saying this because at the moment the trust is zero between the groups, and what's happening is the trust between groups is zero, and the president is seen as trying to hijack the whole process, and he's actually trying to undermine federalism, which is at the moment, at present, the kind of political system that's in place, and trying to use cash from Qatar to buy and corrupt the electoral system. And this is actually there and well established. It's not a rumor. The whole world is aware of this. But still, everyone is trying to make sure that at least people are moving forward. At least things are moving forward.
Yeah.
There is disagreement on the type of electoral system that we are going to have. There is disagreement on how the federal heads of state and the government is actually manipulating issues. They have tried to interfere with the regional elections. When the constitution says that the electoral system, the electoral process is to be carried out along the federal member states' constitution. So in Southwest state, where the government used force, which was also seen as internal interference, because the Ethiopian non-AMISOM forces were used. Are you there?
Yes.
The Ethiopian non-AMISOM forces were used to arrest one of the contestants, and there was chaos and lives were lost in the clash. And then there was also an election that was to take place in Jubaland state, but then there was impasse, there was disagreement between the federal government and the Jubaland member state, and there was challenges. Again, Ethiopian forces were attempted to, take over the place and kind of like doctor an election which is being forced through by the government, not respecting the federal transitional federal constitution or member state constitution. So it's like the use of force and money coming from Gulf states, particularly Qatar, and that nearly or almost have led to some kind of like instability in Jubaland, instability in Southwest state. And the whole thing was that the understanding of the president, for him to come back again to be re-elected, he had to get people who are loyal to him. But he was not following the constitution. he wanted to force his way through. So he wanted to use whatever resources that he could get, Ethiopian forces, Qatari money, to force his way through. He undermines the Senate. We have a Senate which oversees the government dealings in everything. So he's trying to actually undermine this federal system. He's trying to undermine the federal constitution. And to move out of this, it will be the high time that he gets his senses back together and does what is right for the country, not for his ego, you know what I mean? And the way to go forward is through consensus building, gathering, views and thoughts from all corners, and then moving forward.
That's excellent. Okay, my final question, and kind of wraps around your last question. I don't think we have much time left, but well, I'll ask it anyway. You talked about how a state will be developed. Now, the attempt is, your advice is to mainly make the state more centralized and to for the state to be able to operate through elections. And now the elections is unknown. What type of system would it take, or what type of referendum you would have, and that's being decided as kind of ad hoc based on ad hoc basis. But do you think that if we go towards elections, do you think it's going to go towards each side trying to become overpopulated, so each tribe kind of becoming more populated than the other tribes, so they can win the general elections? And do you think the presidency would be from one tribe or another, or would you think it would flip around the regions that were contested or divided in the past, or the dividing and divided people? And what do you think would bring most kind of establish a united Somalia for the long-term period? So would it have to be written in a constitution, for example, to do it something along the line of how Switzerland, for example, has 7 presidents, and none of them actually rule, so they all rule at once? Or will it be a different system kind of thing?
It's not clear yet, but yes, Somaliland and Somalia, there are talks that are ongoing to unify them together to make them as one single state. It's still a long way to go, but for the major part, this constitution mainly is concentrated on the southern Somalia, or the former Italian Somaliland. So the British Somaliland, they already declared themselves independent de facto, and they have got dealings with the rest, some, states from the world, not officially recognizing them, but dealing with them in terms of trades, in terms of other things, in terms of aids they give to them. So there's still kind of like this impasse is still there, but the talks are ongoing, and hopefully they will yield something concrete. Coming to the who's gonna win, mainly it's gonna be concentrated on the south again. Like the former Italian Somaliland. President might come from southern Somalia. Maybe prime minister this time might come from north. We don't know yet, or he might come from south also. We don't know. Usually, traditionally, it is presidents from the north and also south, and also the vice president. The prime minister is also from the south as well. But when a fully united Somalia comes into presence, then I will see. I cannot see a prime minister coming from the south. It will be either the president coming from the north, the prime minister coming from the south, or the president coming from the south, the prime minister coming from the north, as it used to be before the military rule. That's from 69 to 2000. Sorry, from 1969 to 2000 to 1991. But then, when the civil war happens, power dynamics change, power distribution change, and the whole thing has to be revisited and reviewed. and we are there at the moment. But when we move out of this impasse, and then we have a fully developed federal system, whichever it's going to be, we don't know yet, but it's a reality that Somalia is going to move to a federal system, because when you have divided societies, the way out is federalism, where everyone has a stake in the policy making, in the resource sharing, in everything. So I can see the only way out forward for Somalia is a fully developed and finished federal system, with the federal currently working constitution, which is federal, but also which is transitional, to be fully endorsed by the Somali public.
Okay. And do you think the north of Somalia, when they de facto became an independence country, or when they decided to become an independence country, was it based on anything, or was it based on there need to be a nation and we needed to run it as soon as possible? Once the South want to join us, they can. Kind of like a North-South Korea type of system.
It is not racism. It's purely tribal. It's purely based on clan. So the dominant clan sees themselves have been oppressed by the South. Or obviously, when a leader is coming from the South, it could be one of the tribes. So the whole system that they said they rebelled, they said was a tribal clan, was a clan government, when indeed it was only the figurehead was coming from that clan. But as government institutions are actually, every clan is there in Somaliland, technically.
Well, thank you very much for this great interview. Hopefully in the future I'll be asking you more questions regarding the growth and what we could do to make it a better nation. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Mohammed, and we'll speak in the future. Take care of yourself. Thank you so
much for having me.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.